Hey, how's it going? And welcome back to Consuming Cinema, a show about making and pairing food and drinks from popular movies and TV shows. This week, we're making and pairing a mint julep with apple pie from Thank You for Smoking. If you haven't seen Thank You for Smoking, it's a 2005 satirical comedy and the feature directorial debut of Jason Reitman, which he adapted from the 1994 book of the same name, which follows Nick Naylor, a lobbyist for Big Tobacco, specifically the Academy of Tobacco Studies, who every week has lunch with his less than savory peers who call themselves the Mod Squad, or Merchants of Death, comprised of alcohol lobbyist Polly Bailey and firearm lobbyist Bobby J. Bliss, who at one point in the film orders a unique take on apple pie.
That's disgusting.
It's American.
But what to pair with our apple pie?
Like an orange juice or a coffee or a Red Bull?
Well, actually, earlier, Nick visits the head of the Academy of Tobacco Studies called the Captain, who shows him a secret to an iconic cocktail.
You know the secret to a really good julep?
No, sir.
You crush the mint down onto the ice with your thumb, and you grind it in. See? And it releases the menthol. Now, you know who taught me that?
No, sir. Who?
Fidel Castro.
But before we get to our julep, we first have to start our apple pie, which starts with apples, of course.
Do you like apples?
Yeah, sure, I like apples.
How do you like them apples?
Well, in the case of this apple pie, I like my apples peeled and cored, and there's a couple different ways to do this. You could use an apple corer like this one, but ultimately we found that this wasn't the most efficient method, because as we see Bailey demonstrate here, it's actually much easier to simply cut around the core of the apple, and then from each individual wedge, we will cut the apples into thin slices like so. Then, once all of your apples are peeled, cored, and cut into nice thin slices, we are now going to cover them in a spice mix, which consists of 3 cinnamon sticks, 1 teaspoon of clove, 1 star anise, and 3 allspice. Then, using my handy dandy converted coffee grinder / spice grinder that I've used on the show before, we will grind up these spices into a fine powder before then adding them to our bowl of apples, and to this bowl we will also add 1 cup of granulated sugar, 1 cup of brown sugar, a teaspoon of kosher salt, as well as the juice of half a lemon. And then we'll just mix this all together, and you may need to transfer the apples to another bowl like I did, just so everything gets distributed evenly. And I also forgot to add one thing, which is around a teaspoon of nutmeg, and then you want to just cover this and put it in the fridge to allow that sugar, salt, and lemon to slowly macerate and tenderize the apples. But I also forgot to add a teaspoon of ground ginger and around 2 to 3 tablespoons of all-purpose flour. And we'll mix this all together again before then covering the apples and returning them to the fridge. And while our filling is in the fridge, we will now work on our pie dough, which starts in a big bowl and is a pretty simple combination of 2.5 cups of all-purpose flour as well as a tablespoon of sugar in addition to a teaspoon of salt. And then we'll just whisk this all together before then adding a cup of ice cold unsalted butter, which we have cut into little cubes like this, which we'll add to our flour mix and gently toss it around, allowing each little piece of butter to get covered in the flour. And once each piece has a coating of the flour mix, we will now press down on the pieces of butter with the back of a fork, cutting the cold butter into the flour. And for this part, you can actually save yourself a lot of time mixing this by getting a dough blender like this one. But as Bailey demonstrates here, you can use a fork to push down each piece of butter, gradually incorporating it into the flour. But again, I will warn you that this is a considerably more laborious way of doing this. Then, after all that butter is mixed in, we'll need some ice cold water, which we are going to add to our dry mix a 1/4 cup at a time. So gradually mix in the ice water until it ultimately creates a shaggy, sticky mass to a point where it can hold together when you compress it like so. Now we're going to need to transfer our dough to a flat surface, and we'll form the dough into one big circular piece, after which we'll cut that piece in half with a dough cutter and we'll form each half into its own dough puck. Then you want to wrap each dough puck in saran wrap for then putting them in the fridge to set for at least 3 hours or overnight. And once our dough pucks have rested in the fridge, we will now roll out 2 sheets of dough using a rolling pin. So we'll dust our work surface with a bit of flour, as well as a little bit of flour for the rolling pin, and then we're going to roll this dough out. And while ideally you're going for a perfect circle, don't get too worried if it comes out looking like ours did, so long as it's wide enough to cover your pie dish. And once both sheets of crust are rolled out, we will now use one sheet to cover the bottom of the pie dish, and we'll use a paring knife to trim off all the excess bits, and then use those pieces to fill any remaining gaps in the crust. Now with our other sheet, we're going to cut long strips called lattices. Ideally, you want your lattices to be as evenly cut as possible, but I still managed to make our pie look pretty good with sloppy ones. Next, it's time to fill our pie. Now you could do this by just dumping all the apples into the pie, but we decided to tediously place every apple slice in individually because although time-consuming, it makes for a much more visually superior pie, and truthfully, most of the credit for this intensive process goes to Bailey. Then, after your pie is all filled, we will pour over some of the excess liquid, and now we're going to top our pie with our lattices. So we'll lay down 5 horizontal lattices, parallel and even to each other. Then we're going to lift the 2 middle lattices to the center and lay down a vertical lattice over the 3 horizontal ones. Then, similarly, we will lift the other 3 lattices and lay down another vertical lattice. And we'll repeat this process until all 10 lattices are beautifully braided, and now we will seal the lattices to the bottom crust and trim off any excess pie dough. And with the excess dough, we will roll it back out and then cut it into strips, which we'll use to create the outer crust, and fasten the lattices to our bottom crust. Additionally, you can pinch the outer crust like Bailey does here in order to get a really pretty effect. Now we're going to finish this pie off with an egg wash. For our egg wash, we only used the yolk as well as a tiny bit of water, and we'll gently brush our egg wash all over the top crust, which ideally you want to be a pretty light coat. We are now going to put our pie into a 400-degree oven for 20 minutes, before then reducing the heat to 375, turning the pie, and then cooking it for another 40 to 50 minutes, after which our pie will come out looking absolutely spectacular, but resist all temptation to eat it because this pie now needs to rest until it has cooled completely, which will take at least several hours, but you can do it overnight.
Approximately 10 hours later.
And once the pie is properly rested, there's only one question left to ask.
You want a little pie?
Well, if you do, we'll now cut ourselves off a slice by first making one long cut down the center and then cut ourselves a nice even slice. Then using a pie server, we'll scoop out our slice as neatly as possible, getting any of those extra little bits as well. And now we're gonna warm our slice of pie in a 200-degree oven while we start our julep. And any good mint julep starts in a julep cup, like this one I bought on eBay, which actually started out a lot dirtier than this. But I discovered a great trick for cleaning silver by combining baking soda with boiling water, and then submerging the silver into a foil-lined bowl. Now, to our julep cup, the first ingredient we need for a mint julep is mint, of course, preferably as fresh as possible. And we're just gonna add around 10 larger mint leaves to our julep cup, after which we'll also add 1 ounce of Demerara syrup, which is basically a simple syrup like we've done on the show before, but made with Demerara sugar, 1 cup of which we'll add to a saucepan, along with 1 cup of water, and we'll bring that mix to a boil and give it a stir, before then lowering the heat to a simmer and allowing the syrup to reduce. Once it has reduced, we'll bottle it and allow it to cool completely. So add 1 ounce of our Demerara syrup to our julep cup. Now, using a muddler, we are going to muddle this mint and syrup together, pressing down with the muddler, but you don't want to muddle the mint too hard, but at least hard enough to really express those oils in the mint leaves, because that's where all the amazing flavor is going to come from. And once your mint is all muddled, we are then going to add the star of the show, a good quality bourbon, for which I'm using arguably my favorite bourbon of all time, E.H. Taylor Small Batch, which is a whiskey that has been bottled in bond, which means that the spirit must be aged for at least 4 years, bottled at precisely 100 proof, and must be made by 1 single distiller at 1 single distillery in 1 season, then aged in a bonded warehouse. So we'll add 2, maybe 2.5 ounces of bourbon to our julep cup. Now, in the meantime, grab our warmed apple pie out of the oven, and we'll top it with a slice of American cheese. Then we'll put that pie back in the oven to melt the cheese, and while it does, we'll finish up our mint julep by first crushing up some ice with a Lewis bag and mallet, and then we'll take a handful of this crushed ice and add it to our julep cup. Then, using a bar spoon or a swizzle stick, you want to swizzle this all together, and you want to do this until the julep cup becomes nice and cold and frosty.
Frost yourself.
And once your glass is frosted, we then want to top our julep off with some more crushed ice, and we're looking for a real snow cone-like look to this. Now we'll pull our cheese-covered pie from the oven, and finally we will garnish with some fresh mint, which we will slap a few times to express the oils, and we'll also do the captain's little trick of pressing the ice into the mint with your thumb, although as far as I know this is not in any way traditional. Then, very lastly, add a straw. And at long last, your mint julep with apple pie is finally done. Now there's nothing left to do but to taste it. So we'll start with a bite of our apple pie. I wanted to get a bite without any cheese first as a sort of control group. And if I don't say so myself, this really is some incredible apple pie. The crust is buttery, flaky, and just the right bit salty. The filling is tender and sweet with the perfect balance of sour. But of course, we have to try a bite of this pie with some of that melty cheese. And I gotta say, this is still really good. You can't really taste the cheese all that much, as it mostly just provides added richness to the dish. It makes sense if you think about it, as cheese and apples are actually a pretty common culinary pairing. But how does our apple pie pair with a mint julep? Well, first of all, this is definitely the best mint julep I've ever had. The E.H. Taylor is absolutely sublime. It has a caramely-like sweetness that works so well with the mint and demerara. The brown sugar and baking spice notes from the bourbon pair marvelously with the similar notes in the filling of the pie. Not to mention the freshness of the mint and refreshing nature of the julep are wonderful complements to the richness of the pie and the cheese. So it goes without saying that this is a truly special pairing and one that is without a doubt worthy of 2 big thumbs up. If you like the channel, please like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. Please leave any video suggestions in the comments below. Full recipes will be included in a link in the video description. Follow us on all forms of social media at Consuming Cinema. And don't forget to join us next week when we make a pairing from deep water. And as a way of saying thank you for recently hitting 2,000 subscribers, I wanted to give away one of the glasses on the show. Not this one though, because I spent way too much time restoring that. However, you could win either the Duff beer mug from our Simpsons episode you can watch here, or the Marty Moose mug from our Christmas Vacation episode you can watch here, or last but not least, the 7 and 7 mug from our Saturday Night Fever episode you can watch here. So if you want to win one of those, just comment down below why that show or movie is significant to you and why you like the channel. And as always, thank you for watching.